आज हम बातचीत कर रहे हैं इमोशनल अब्यूज़ के बारे में। और इमोशनल अब्यूज़ एक वास्ट टॉपिक है जो हमारे कम्युनिटी के लोग डिस्कस नहीं करना चाहते। कई बार को कहते हैं कि इमोशनल अब्यूज़ क्या होता है। कई बार कुछ लोग कुछ बातें ऐसे आपके क्लोज रिलेशनशिप वाले कह जाते हैं कि आप सारी ज़िंदगी उस बात को अपने जहन से निकालते नहीं हो। वो फिज़िकल अब्यूज़ नहीं है, किसी ने आपको मारा पीटा नहीं है, लेकिन आपको इमोशनली वो दाग जो आपके दिल में है वो कभी भरता नहीं। What doesn't work with emotional abuse? Sometimes attempts to deal with or reduce emotional abuse can backfire and actually make the abuse worse. Some tactics that are not effective ways of dealing with abuse include arguing with the abuser. Try to argue with an abuser can escalate the problem and may result in violence. There is no way to argue with an abuser because they will always find more ways to blame, shame, or criticize. They may also try to turn the tables and play the victim. Trying to understand or make excuses for the abuser, it might be tempting to try to make sense of the other person's behavior or to come up with excuses to justify their actions. Finding ways to sympathize with or minimize an abuser's actions can make leaving the situation that much more difficult. Attempting to appease the abuser. Appeasing the other person might seem like a form of de escalation, but it tends to backfire in the long run and may serve to enable further abuse. Instead of trying to change yourself or your behavior to suit the abuser's whims, focus on establishing clear boundaries and avoid engaging with them if possible. Healing from emotional abuse. If you've experienced emotional abuse, there are few things you can do to aid in the healing process. Acknowledge the abuse. Stop minimizing or even denying the abuse and admit that it did happen so you can begin to heal from it. Make a commitment to yourself. Commit to stopping the emotional abuse cycle. Also, commit to sticking with the healing process no matter how long it takes because you are worth it and deserve to live a happy life. Practice self compassion. Give yourself the same level of compassion, kindness, and flexibility to grow as you would give a friend who has experienced emotional abuse. Reach out to the loved ones. Get in touch with the people who care about and support you so they can help you through this difficult time. Seek counseling. Physiotherapy can help you put your emotionally abusive relationship into perspective while also providing tools for overcoming the abuse. Talk with others who've been emotionally abused. Sharing your experience with others who've been through the same can help you recognize that you aren't alone. Also, providing access to the strategies they use that help them heal. इमोशनल अब्यूज़ हमारी कम्युनिटी में एक इतना बड़ा मसला है कि वी डू नॉट एक्चुअली लुक इनटू इट। वी डू नॉट थिंक कि ये जो इमोशनल अब्यूज़ है ये लॉन्ग लाइफ टर्म में क्या इफ़ेक्ट्स करते हैं। Emotional abuse, like physical abuse, can have long term effects on the brain and body. They may include doubting self worth and abilities, which may make it harder to leave a relationship. Emotional and psychological abuse have serious effects, and it is common for these types of abuse to turn into physical violence. Emotionally abusive people also tend to create chaos. Some examples of this red flag include making confusing and contradictory statements, sometimes called crazy making, behaving so erratically and unpredictably that you feel like you're walking on eggshells, uses emotional blackmail. कई बार हम ये समझ नहीं पाते कि इमोशनल ब्लैकमेल है क्या। Sometimes it comes as verbal attacks, mood swings, or fits of yelling. When emotionally abusive behaviors in someone else are difficult to spot, you may be able to identify the abuse by exploring yourself. Personal signs you may be experiencing emotional abuse can include social withdrawal. You feel isolated or withdrawn from others. कई बार marriages में जो abuse होता है ना, emotional abuse within a marriage may make a person feel that they need to change their behaviors to stop the abuse, or that they have to avoid conflict and do as their partner says to stay safe. Emotional abuse in the workplace or workplace bullying can involve intimidating, undermining, or humiliating a person in the workplace. Let's go to the first one, marriage abuse. कई बार आप इतना ज़्यादा अब्यूज़ हो जाते हो कि आपको एक फियर आ जाता है, डर आ जाता है कि अगर मैं यही बिहेवियर रखूं तो मैं बहुत ज़्यादा फिज़िकली अब्यूज़ ना करना शुरू कर दूं. कई लोगों को फियर होता है कि कहीं वायलेंस ना क्रिएट हो जाए, और इस वजह से वो ये इमोशनल अब्यूज़ को सहते रहते हैं जस्ट कि अपने पार्टनर के साथ वो स्टे सेफ रह सकते हैं. एक डर होता है, एक फियर होता है कि अगर मैं इससे ज़्यादा लड़ाई करूं या इसको जवाब दूं तो हो सकता है दे वुड बी वायलेंट टुवर्ड्स मी, दे माइट डू दिस, दे माइट डू दैट. तो इस वजह से कई लोग कॉम्प्रोमाइज़ कर लेते हैं, बट दे आर इमोशनली अब्यूज. कई बार आप काम पर काम वर्कर्स के साथ होते हो, को वर्कर्स जो है आपके वो बुली करते हैं आपको, आपके कपड़े पर कहेंगे कुछ, आपके मेकअप पर कहेंगे, आपके जूते पर कहेंगे, आपके बोलने पर कहेंगे, आपके सोच पर वो कमेंट करेंगे. वो आपको इंटिमिडेट करता है. आपको ऐसा लगता है कि मैं बहुत छोटा महसूस कराने की कोशिश करते हैं, पर आप कर क्या सकते हो. कई बार मेजॉरिटी वर्कर्स एक साथ मिलकर, जो बुली वाले वर्कर्स होते हैं, एक साथ होकर आपको इंटिमिडेट करते हैं और आप उन अब्यूज़र्स को सहते हो. कई बार कारण होता है इसका कि ये लोग मुझे इकट्ठे होकर के मुझे हार्म ना करें. दीज आर द थिंग्स. इमोशनल अब्यूज़ आपको बहुत ज़्यादा बॉदर करती है एंड यू वाना स्टे हैप्पी इन द एनवायरनमेंट. कई बार लोग हैप्पी रहने की वजह से कई बार इमोशनल अब्यूज़ को इग्नोर करते हैं. करना नहीं चाहिए. यू हैव टू स्पीक फॉर योरसेल्फ. और जिस दिन आप अपने लिए स्पीक करना शुरू कर दोगे, यू विल मेक इट वेरी क्लियर टू योर अब्यूज़र दैट थिंग्स डज नॉट मैटर. चाइल्ड अब्यूज़ एक अनदर स्टोरी है हमारी कम्युनिटी में. Emotional abuse, which is sometimes called psychological abuse, is a pattern of behavior that damages a child's sense of self-worth and negatively impacts their emotional development. कई बार हम अपने जो अब्यूजिव बिहेवियर है उसको रियलाइज़ नहीं कर रहे कि हम अपने बच्चों को नुकसान पहुंचा रहे हैं. बच्चे अब्यूजिव बिहेवियर देखकर नेगेटिवली इम्पैक्ट होते हैं. उनके जो डेवलपमेंट है वो सही तरीक़े से नहीं होता है. In addition to withholding love and support, the person emotionally abusing the child also may reject, criticize, threaten, demean, and berate the child. They also may humiliate the child, engage in name calling, and insult them. आपने भी सुना होगा, चाहे दोस्तों में या फिर अपने फैमिली रिलेशनशिप्स में, कि बच्चों को नाम दिया जाता है, बच्चों को शेम किया जाता है. मुझे यहाँ तक लोगों ने बताया कि बच्चों के प्राइवेट पार्ट्स को टच करके उन्हें शेम किया जाता है. हम ये नहीं समझते कि इस पे बच्चों का जो असर है, व्हाट यू डूइंग, वो पूरी ज़िंदगी उनके दिमाग में बैठा रहता है कि ये पर्सन ने मेरे साथ ये किया था, ये पर्सन ने मेरे साथ ये किया था. Emotional abuse can occur in conjunction with physical abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect, and is one of the hardest forms of abuse to recognize. Often it is subtle and insidious, slowly chipping away at child's self-esteem and sense of safety and belonging. Like other forms of abuse, emotional child abuse is about power and control. The perpetrator manipulates and controls the child by using words and actions that are emotionally hurtful and damaging. Experiencing emotional abuse is linked with devastating lasting effects, including increased rates of disease and mental health disorders. कई बार आप बेबी सिटर्स को ट्रस्ट करते हो, अपने फैमिली में कभी बच्चों को छोड़कर आप कहीं जाना चाहते हो, आपको नहीं पता उस एनवायरनमेंट में बच्चों को कितना अब्यूज़ सहने को मिलता है. शायद उन्हें नेम कॉलिंग क्या होगा, उन्हें शेम क्या होगा, उन्हें महसूस करवाया होगा कि कितने छोटे हैं वो. हम लोग तो अपनी ज़िंदगी बड़े ऐश करते हैं. कभी हम बच्चों को बेबी सिटर के पास छोड़ के या फैमिली मेम्बर के पास छोड़ के हम चले जाते हैं अपने अपने सोशल लाइफ एंजॉय करने के लिए, बट ये हम नहीं महसूस करते कि बच्चा वहाँ सेफ भी है या नहीं है. इसीलिए यूजुअली जो एक्सटेंडेड फैमिलीज होते हैं, जो इन लॉज होते हैं, उनके साथ अगर आपके बोलना, आपके रिलेशनशिप सही हो, तो बच्चे बहुत ही सिक्योर हैंड्स में होते हैं, क्योंकि कभी भी आपके पेरेंट्स नहीं चाहेंगे कि बच्चों के साथ कुछ गलत होवे. There'll be a different care they will give it to them. Emotional abuse can be harder to detect than other forms of child abuse. Typically, it takes place in the confines of a child's home, often with no outside witnesses. There might not be any obvious outward signs that abuse is taking place, as there would be with physical abuse. Sometimes a child's behavior is the only thing that indicates that there is a problem. Developmentally inappropriate behavior, such as acting very immature or too mature for their age, can be a sign of abuse. As can dramatic behavioral changes. For example, a child who used to be self-assured and did not seek extra attention might suddenly become clingy to non-abusive adults. Additionally, a child might start acting out or having trouble socially or academically. अब हम लोग अगर अपने बच्चों के ये साइंस नहीं समझ सकते हैं, then it's a problem there itself. Identifying emotional abuse. Behaviors that can be signs of emotional abuse: anxiety, depression, and or avoidance, declining performance at school, delayed emotional development, desire to hurt themselves or other people, desperately seeking affection from other adults, development regression, for example, bedwetting, frequent complaints of headaches, stomach aches, or other somatic symptoms with no known cause, loss of interest in social activities or other interest, low self-esteem. ये जब आप अपने बच्चों में देखते हो तो आपको समझ जाना चाहिए कि there is something wrong, and you have to sit down and talk to your kids. कई बार हम अगर बच्चा बेड वेटिंग कर देता है तो हम गुस्से हो जाते हैं, क्योंकि यू हैव टू वॉश ऑल द बेडिंग्स. नहीं, गुस्सा नहीं, प्यार से अपने बच्चे के साथ बैठो और उसकी बात को सुनो, किस वजह से ये हो रहा है. बच्चे अगर कंप्लेन करते हैं कि हमारे हेड एक्स है, स्टमक एक्स है, या कोई सिम्टम्स है, तो उसको महसूस करो, उसके जड़ तक जाओ, बातें करो, पूछो किस बात को उसे बॉदर हो रहे हैं, वो किस बात से उन्हें प्रॉब्लम है. बट वी डोंट डू दैट, डू वी? अपने आप से पूछो. खैर दोस्तों, इस टॉपिक पे बात बहुत ज़्यादा है करने के लिए. आई विल टेक अ क्विक कमर्शियल ब्रेक एंड विल बी राइट बैक. सुनते रहिए www.mwlive.ca.
ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਮਾਮਲੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਹੀ ਸਲਾਹ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਹਿੱਤ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਕਰਵਾਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ। ਜਿਸ ਲਈ ਨਿਊ ਵਰਲਡ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਸਰਵਿਸਿਜ਼ ਦੇ ਬਲਵਿੰਦਰ ਜੀਤ ਬਾਸੀ ਨੂੰ ਕਰੋ ਕਾਲ 604 572 4000। ਇਹ ਸਰਟੀਫਾਈਡ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਕੰਸਲਟੈਂਟ ਤੇ ICCRC ਦੇ ਮੈਂਬਰ ਨੇ ਔਰ 2011 ਤੋਂ ਸੇਵਾਵਾਂ ਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਹਨ। ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਹਰ ਮਸਲੇ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਕਰੋ ਕਾਲ 604 575 8000। ਯੂਨੋ ਨੰਬਰ 403 83 18 120 ਸਟਰੀਟ ਸਰੀ ਜਾਂ ਵਿਜ਼ਿਟ ਕਰੋ www.newworldcanada.ca।
ਕੱਕਾ ਖੱਕਾ ਗੱਗਾ ਖੱਗਾ ਘਰ ਪਾਪਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਘਰ ਕਦੋਂ ਲਵਾਂਗੇ?
ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਘਰ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਦੇਣਾ ਹੈ?
ਉਹ ਪੁੱਤਰਾ ਹੁਣ ਗੱਲ ਬਣ ਗਈ। ਮੈਂ ਪਲੈਨਟ ਗਰੁੱਪ ਰਿਐਲਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਮਨਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਢੁੱਡੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਲਈ ਹੈ। ਵਧੀਆ ਡੀਲ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਦੇਣਗੇ। ਕੰਸਟਰਕਸ਼ਨ ਅਤੇ ਰੈਨੋਵੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਸਿਰਦਰਦੀ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਬਚਾਂਗੇ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਕੋਲ ਕੰਸਟਰਕਸ਼ਨ ਦਾ 15 ਸਾਲ ਦਾ ਤਜਰਬਾ ਹੈ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਪਾਸ ਲੈਂਗਲੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ 1600 ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ 2100 ਸਕੁਅਰ ਫੁੱਟ ਬਣੇ ਟਾਊਨ ਹੋਮ ਵੀਲ ਚੇਅਰ ਐਕਸੈਸਿਬਲ ਹਨ। ਚਾਹੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਐਲੀਵੇਟਰ ਵੀ ਲਗਵਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ। ਫਰਸਟ ਟਾਈਮ ਹੋਮ ਖਰੀਦਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹੋ? ਅੱਜ ਹੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰੋ। ਰੀਅਲ ਸਟੇਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੈਸਟ ਡੀਲ ਲੈਣ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਮਨਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਢੁੱਡੀਕੇ 6047168570 604 716 8570।
ਘਰ ਖਰੀਦਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹੋ ਜਾਂ ਘਰ ਵੇਚਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹੋ? ਫਾਈਨ ਪ੍ਰਿੰਟਸ ਨੂੰ ਪੜ੍ਹਨਾ ਤੇ ਸਮਝਣਾ ਅਤਿਅੰਤ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ।
ਇਹ ਸਿਰਫ ਔਰ ਸਿਰਫ ਭਰੋਸੇਮੰਦ ਰੀਅਲਟਰ ਹੀ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਨ। ਘਰ ਵੇਚਣ ਦਾ ਮਨ ਬਣਾਇਆ ਜਾਂ ਘਰ ਖਰੀਦਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹੋ? ਸਹੀ ਤੇ ਭਰੋਸੇਯੋਗ ਸਲਾਹ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਕਾਲ ਕਰੋ 30 ਸਾਲ ਦਾ ਤਜਰਬਾ ਰੱਖਣ ਵਾਲੀ ਰੀਅਲਟਰ ਕੁਲਜੀਤ ਕੌਰ ਨੂੰ। SRS Panorama Realty 604 767 9992 604 767 9992। ਕੁਲਜੀਤ ਕੌਰ।
ਐਕਸਪ੍ਰੈਸ ਐਂਟਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ PR ਲਈ ਅਪਲਾਈ ਕਰਨਾ ਹੈ ਤਾਂ ਆਈਡੀਆ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਨਵਨੀਤ ਸ਼ਰਮਾ ਜੀ ਨੂੰ ਕਰੋ ਕਾਲ 604 597 1119 ਤੇ। BC ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ PNP ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਸਸਕੈਚੁਅਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ SINP ਦੇ ਲਈ ਗਾਈਡੈਂਸ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ। ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟਸ ਨੇ ਐਪਲੀਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਫਾਈਲ ਕਰਨੀ ਹੈ। ਸਟੱਡੀ ਵੀਜ਼ਾ, ਵਰਕ ਪਰਮਿਟ, ਮੈਰਿਜ, LMIA ਐਪਲੀਕੇਸ਼ਨ, ਓਨਰ ਆਪਰੇਟਰ ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਇਨਵੈਸਟਮੈਂਟ ਐਪਲੀਕੇਸ਼ਨ, ਕੇਅਰ ਗਿਵਰ ਨੈਨੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਅਪਲਾਈ ਕਰਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮਦਦ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਆਈਡੀਆ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਦਫ਼ਤਰ ਸਰੀ ਕਲੋਨਾ ਤੇ ਰਜ਼ਾਈਨਾ ਵਿਖੇ ਨੇ। ਸਰੀ ਦਾ ਦਫ਼ਤਰ ਯਾਰਕ ਸੈਂਟਰ ਵਿਖੇ ਯੂਨੋ ਨੰਬਰ 209 7928 128 ਸਟਰੀਟ 604 597 1119। ਆਈਡੀਆ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ।
ਹਾਊਸ ਵਾਰਮਿੰਗ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਤੇ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਿਗਾਹ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਬਲਾਈਂਡਸ ਵਾਲੀ ਸੀ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੀ ਪਤਾ ਇਹ ਘਰ ਦੀ ਸਜਾਵਟ ਗ੍ਰੇਟ ਬਲਾਈਂਡਸ ਦਾ ਕਮਾਲ ਹੈ।
ਗ੍ਰੇਟ ਬਲਾਈਂਡਸ ਦੇ ਮਾਡਰਨ ਡਿਜ਼ਾਈਨ ਦੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਵੱਡੀ ਸਿਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਦੇਖਣ ਤੇ ਖਰੀਦਣ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਇਕਲੌਤੇ ਸ਼ੋਰੂਮ ਦਾ ਪਤਾ ਹੈ ਯੂਰ ਨੰਬਰ 14 13478 78th ਐਵਨਿਊ 604 503 7007 ਤੇ ਕਰੋ ਕਾਲ। ਗ੍ਰੇਟ ਬਲਾਈਂਡਸ ਦੇ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਵਾਲੇ ਸ਼ੋਰੂਮ ਦਾ ਪਤਾ 3705 ਅਵਰਨ ਵੇ, ਅਵਰਨ, ਵਾਸ਼ਿੰਗਟਨ 253321 7007 ਜਾਂ greatblindscanada.com ਤੇ ਕਰੋ ਵਿਜ਼ਿਟ।
ਘਰ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਲੋ, ਪਰਦਾ ਗ੍ਰੇਟ ਬਲਾਈਂਡਸ ਤੋਂ ਹੀ ਲਵਾਓ। जय दोस्तों, आप सुन रहे हैं www.mwlive.ca और आज हम बात कर रहे हैं व्हाट इज़ इमोशनल अब्यूज़। बच्चों के इमोशनल अब्यूज़ के बारे में हम बात कर रहे हैं। आपसे भी गुजारिश है कि साथ ज़रूर देते रहिए। दिस इज़ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट कि हम लोगों को समझना चाहिए कि व्हाट इज़ इमोशनल अब्यूज़। कहते हैं you might assume that a child being abused wouldn't be attached to the adult caregiver who's abusing them. But this is not always the case. Children often remain loyal to the person who's abusing them. Parent-child relationships are complex, and children typically want the approval and love of their parents, even if their caretaker is abusive. Plus, they may be afraid of what will happen if they disclose the abuse. An emotionally abused child also might think that being called names, heavily criticized, or denied affection in a normal way of life. They might not tell anyone about the abuse because they believe their experiences represent normal family behavior. Additionally, they may be embarrassed or think it is their fault. Traits of perpetrators. While perpetrators of emotional abuse can be hard to identify, there are potential signs that may indicate an adult is abusing a child. Belittling the child in public, openly admitting to dislike or hating the child, applying severe punishments, having unrealistic expectations, and being emotionally distant or indifferent are emotionally abusive behaviors. Some people who abuse children have a history of violence and aggression or have substance use disorders. However, if you believe a child is being emotionally abused, don't automatically assume that the abuse is being perpetrated by the child's parents. While a child is more likely to be abused by a caregiver or family member, any authority figure can be abusive. For instance, a coach, a daycare worker, teacher, pastor, or even an older sibling could be abusing the child. Also, there could be other causes of a child's changes in behavior. Emotional child abuse can take several forms. At one end of the spectrum are insults or belittling words or actions, while the other end can be total indifference and neglect. A caregiver who's emotionally abusive often use words, but their actions also can be abusive. And sometimes it's a lack of action that is abusive. When a parent or caregiver doesn't show a child love or make them feel wanted, secure, and worthy, these actions result in emotional deprivation. People who are abusive also may withhold physical affection or loving touch, both of which are essential to a child's emotional development and feeling of security and belonging. Any person in a child's life can be emotionally abusive, and the abuse can take many forms. Examples of emotional abuse include a babysitter who constantly screams at the kids and make threats, exposure to domestic violence at home, a step-parent who says that they wish a child didn't exist, a teacher who makes fun of a child in front of the class, or a parent with alcohol use disorder who gets angry when they drink. Experiencing emotional abuse as a child increases the risk that a person may engage in emotional abuse of a child. Other risk factors include social isolation or separation from extended family, having a physical or mental illness such as post-traumatic stress disorder or depression, using drugs or alcohol, or dealing with financial stress, unemployment, or poverty. Other risk factors may include a family crisis or family stress, such as being victimized by domestic abuse or having marital conflicts, feeling jealousy, anger, or resentment towards the child or child care responsibilities. Lacking parenting skills or an understanding of child development, or raising a child who is developmentally or physically disabled. Of course, not all people in these situations are emotionally abused. And children do not cause another person to be emotionally abusive. Engaging in the emotional abuse of a child is a choice, intentional or not, that the perpetrators makes. While these risk factors may increase the likelihood that abuse might occur, the person being emotionally abusive still has agency and can learn to make better, less damaging choices. इमोशनल अब्यूज़ पे बहुत सारी बातें हैं जो हमारी कम्युनिटी को ज़रूर बेहतर समझना चाहिए. Impact of emotional abuse. Experts use a rating scale called Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACE, to categorize and measure the impact of child abuse and other traumas. In this system, a higher score means more exposure to abuse and trauma. Research shows that a higher ACE score is linked with greater risk of adverse physical and mental health impacts and behavioral issues later in life. The consequences of child abuse in any form can be served and often persist well into adulthood. A child often believes that they are responsible for the abuse and that it means they are unloved, unlovable, and unwanted. Emotional abuse can interfere with a child's ability to form and maintain healthy attachments. Attachment issues in early childhood have been linked to insecure attachments in adulthood. Children also might be at the increased risk for poor peer relations, trouble with intimacy, difficulty with a conflict resolution, and relational aggression. Emotional abuse in childhood also has been linked to deli- delinquency and sexually aggressive behavior in young adults. Problems at school and with peers also more common in the children. Without appropriate intervention, people who were abused as children are more likely to abuse their kids than people who did not experience abuse. Stopping the abuse and helping the child cope and process the trauma they experience can reduce the childhood of the cycle of abuse continuing to the next generation. Teens who experienced emotional abuse as children are more likely to be diagnosed with at least one mental illness, such as depression or anxiety, which can persist into adulthood. People with a history of emotional abuse are also at an increased risk of self harm, including attempting suicide. Emotional abuse doesn't just have a negative effect on individuals and families, it also strains society as a whole. The consequences of abuse burden the health and social care system and is costly because of increased educational failure, crime, and the need for mental health services. Not everyone who has a history of emotional abuse experiences lifelong scars, though the duration, severity, and age of onset of the abuse, as well as the personal coping skills and resources of support available to the child, are influential factors. For example, having other supportive adults in their lives also can offset the impact. Mandated reporters are people who encounter children through their occupation, including child daycare providers, educators, legal and law enforcement personnel, and medical personnel. These reporters have an obligation to report suspected emotional abuse just as they do physical abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect. Even if you're not a mandated reporter and you suspect that a child is being emotionally abused, report it to Child Protective Services. A child who may be experiencing abuse needs to be evaluated by social services to ensure they are being treated appropriately. If you're a parent and think your child is being emotionally abused by someone else, such as a teacher, a pastor, or a coach, take steps to intervene. You might need to enlist professional help, such as a form of the person's boss, social services, and or police to keep the child safe. If you have emotionally abused your child, or if a partner is emotionally abusive, it's important for both your mental health and your child's that you ask for help. Working with a therapist can be beneficial for you and your family. If a child is being emotionally abused and the first course of action is to ensure the child's safety, then appropriate treatments can begin. The perpetrator might require treatment, especially if it's a parent. Examples of treatment for a perpetrator include individual therapy, parenting classes, and social services. Those who have experienced emotional abuse often benefit from therapy with a licensed mental health professional. Once they have processed what they went through emotionally, they can begin the healing process and learn healthy coping mechanisms, social skills, and conflict resolution. Although coping with the effects of emotional abuse can take some time, there are some factors that can have a protective effect, such as having a positive relationship with another adult. For example, a nurturing parent, grandparent, or the support of a teacher or coach can buffer some of the negative effects of emotional abuse. Be a consistent, loving presence in their lives by spending time with them, encouraging them, and reminding them of their value and worth. Help them see that they are not defined by the words and actions of the person abusing them. Instead, empower them to see their strengths and to set goals for the future. If you know a child who is being emotionally abused or you suspect emotional abuse, it's important to let someone know your concerns. Reporting suspected abuse prompts an investigation followed by interventions if needed. In the meantime, What you can do by encouraging and supportive person in the child's life, some of the damage caused emotionally abuse can be offset by kind and empowering actions of others. Let the child know you love them and believe in them. If they learn to identify what they are good at and set goals, they can learn to offset the negative words and actions of others. So make sure करो कोई भी चाहे बच्चा हो चाहे adult हो, if they are going through abuse, emotional abuse, it's very very important कि you try to get help for them. It's very very important. हम लोग अक्सर उसे इग्नोर करते हैं, but that's not what we should do. We should get help. और बच्चों के साथ ख़ास तौर से इमोशनल अब्यूज़ करने का किसी को हक न दो. स्टैंड फॉर योर राइट्स. आज के इस प्रोग्राम से हम आपसे इजाज़त चाहते हैं. Until next time, goodbye and be safe.